$100,000? Left alone, becomes $1.4 million. You don't add another dollar. You don't pick the right stock. You don't time the market. You leave it alone in a low-cost index fund. 100 grand becomes 1.4 million in 34 years. 82% of Americans approaching retirement have never seen this projection on a 401k statement. Their plan provider doesn't show it. Their advisor doesn't run it. Because the answer is do nothing. And nobody bills on do nothing. You've been told to contribute more. The math says leave the first 100,000 alone. For the next 15 minutes, picture a snowball at the top of a hill. For the first 100 feet of the slope, the snowball barely changes. It picks up a thin dusting. Most people give up. They figure if it hasn't grown after 100 feet, it never will. But somewhere around the halfway point, the snowball starts to gather faster than your eye can track. By 3/4 of the way down, it's bigger than the person who started it. By the bottom, it's terrifying. Compounding works exactly the same way. The first 15 years of a 30-year run feel slow. The last 15 are where 80% of the wealth gets created. Most people quit at the top of the hill. They've been told it doesn't work. They never see the bottom. Before we run the math, one note: we've built a free compounding curve calculator. Link in the description. No email gate, no advisor pitch, just the curve. 4 levers: time, return rate, fees, and tax drag. Time is by far the biggest. Most people get this wrong because they think it's linear. It isn't. Watch what happens. $100,000 at 8%. After 10 years, $216,000. After 20 years, $466,000. After 30, $1.006 million. After 40 years, $2.172 million. Most people learned the rule of 72 and assumed money doubles every decade at 8%. It doesn't. It doubles every 9 years. Over 40 years, that 1 year shorter doubling cycle adds an extra $365,000 to your endpoint. Now look at the second line, the gray one. Same starting 100 grand, but you also contribute $500 a month for 35 years. Total contributed $210,000 over your lifetime. Result at year 35. The contributions add about 20% to your final balance. The original 100 grand sitting there doing nothing did the other 80%. The compounding curve is the worker. Your contributions are the cherry on top. Meet Marcus, 34 years old, software engineer in Atlanta. Just rolled $100,000 from an old 401k into a low-cost IRA. 3 scenarios. 1. He leaves it alone. No more contributions. At 65, he has $1.06 million. 2. He contributes $500 a month for 31 years. He hits $1.5 million. 3. He contributes $1,000 a month. He hits $2.04 million. Marcus's 401k provider only shows him scenario 3, pre-tax with company match, because that scenario maximizes their assets under management. Nobody shows Marcus that scenario 1, doing nothing, gets him 80% of the way to retirement on its own. Marcus's actual best move? Get to 100,000 invested as fast as possible. Then keep contributing if he can, but understand that the marginal return on contributions falls off a cliff. The first 100,000 is the only hard part. After that, time does the work. Lever 2. The annual rate of return. A 1% difference in return matters very little for the first 10 years. By year 30, it's the difference between a comfortable retirement and a forced one. $100,000 at 6% over 35 years. $768,000. At 8%, $1.48 million. At 10%, $2.81 million. Same starting balance, same time horizon. The 2% gap between 6 and 8 doubles your endpoint. The 4% gap between 6 and 10 almost quadruples it. That's not a rounding error. That's $2 million of difference, generated by the same dollar of starting capital, just because of the rate. Here's where 401k providers get clever. The default target date fund glides toward bonds in your 50s. By the time you're 60, you're often holding 60% fixed income, which over the last decade has returned closer to 4% than 8. That glide path cost the average retiree $680,000 over a 30-year retirement. It's not malicious. It's optimized for limit volatility, not for maximize ending balance. Wade Pfau and Michael Kitces publish research showing that retirees with rising equity allocations through retirement, not declining ones, produce better outcomes in the bottom 10% of market scenarios. The default is wrong. The math has been wrong for a decade. The industry hasn't updated. David and Karen, both 50, just outside Sacramento. Combined 401k balance, $400,000. They have 15 years to retirement. Karen's plan? Default, a 2035 target date fund, has a forward expected return of about 6.2%. If they switch to a simpler 80-20 stock bond split using the plan's index options, expected return jumps to about 8.5. Run the math over 15 years. The target date fund grows their 400 to roughly 980,000. The index split grows it to 1.64 million. $658,000 of difference from a single fund switch. That takes 10 minutes inside their plan portal. If this is the kind of math your 401k provider isn't running for you, hit subscribe. New episode every Wednesday. Same math. Different angle, always free, always ungated. Lever 3. Fees. Lever 4, tax drag. Together they account for most of the difference between what your statement says and what you actually keep. A 1% expense ratio. Sounds small, doesn't feel like much. Over 30 years, it eats 28% of your ending balance. If your portfolio would have been 1.4 million at 0.05% fees, it's 1.01 million at 1% fees. 390,000 gone. To the fund manager, the plan administrator, the advisor. Here's the breakdown. Fund expense ratio, 0.55%. Plan administration fee, 0.3%. Advisor or rev share, 0.15%. Total, about 1%. That's the median 401k plan in the United States. The 28% figure is never on the 401k statement. By federal regulation, plans must disclose fees in the 404A5 disclosure. The disclosure is 23 pages of 9-point font. Almost no one reads it. The compliance department considers that a feature. 4-step audit. Step 1. Log into your plan portal. Step 2. This is the deadline. If you skip it, none of the other steps matter. Pull the 404A5 fee disclosure document. It's required to be available. Step 3. List every fund's expense ratio. Step 4. Replace anything above 0.2% with the lowest cost equivalent. 3 tiers. Under 0.2, you're winning. 0.2 to 0.75. You're acceptable. Above 0.75, you're paying for the firm's office space. Roberta, 71, retired in 2021, Tampa. She started investing in 1986 with $50,000 from a small inheritance. Today, $1.64 million. She added approximately $16,000 in additional contributions across 40 years. The other $1.57 million is pure compounding. What made it work? She picked the Vanguard 500 index fund in 1986 because it had the lowest fee she could find. 0.20% then. 0.04% now. She never touched it. She never moved it. She never panicked during 8 different bear markets. Roberta isn't a genius. Her broker doesn't put her in the firm newsletter as a case study. Because the case study is, she ignored the broker for 40 years. That's not a marketable story. 3 things to do this week. 1. Pull your 404A5 disclosure tonight. List every fee. 2. And this is the lever that pays the highest return for the least effort. Switch any fund above 0.2% expense ratio to the lowest cost index alternative inside the plan. 3. Stop checking the balance. The compounding curve does its best work when you're not watching it. That's it. 3 steps. Most people will spend more time picking a streaming service tonight than they ever will optimizing the 401k that determines whether they retire at 65 or 73. Stock picking does not make the difference. Market timing does not make the difference. Even contribution rate past the first 100,000 makes a smaller difference than people think. Fees and time make the difference. And one final reversal. The Dalbar Quantitative Analysis of Investor Behavior, published every year for 30 years, measures the gap between what the average investor earned and what their funds earned. The most recent number? 3.1% per year. The average mutual fund investor earned 3.1% per year less than the funds they were holding, because they bought high and sold low. Over 30 years on a $100,000 portfolio, that gap cost $388,000. 72% of investors underperform the very funds they own, not by a little, by an average of 3.1% a year. The math says don't trade, don't switch, don't react. Hold the index. The snowball always rolls. The math is 40 years old, peer-reviewed, and undisputed. $100,000 left alone in a low-cost index fund becomes $1.4 million in 34 years, $2.8 million in 40, $5.7 million in 48. 80% of the wealth in a 30-year retirement portfolio comes from the compounding curve. 20% comes from your contributions. The industry only sells you the 20% because the 80% is free. Secure your license to chill. Fix the wealth drain today.